a biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
In this day and age, a lot of people are juggling marriage, family, work, church, and a number of other activities. It's likely that you're often frantic, busy, or time poor, struggling to make space in life. Our special guest today says you can't outrun busyness with activity. He says we need to build in habits of keeping pace and making space. In our modern age, the impact of digital overuse and internet practice is having a huge impact on our lack of space. Daniel C. is an award-winning author of the book Spacemaker, How to Unplug, Unwind, and Think Clearly in the Digital Age. He also wrote Raising Tech-Healthy Humans, How to Reset Your Children's Tech Habits and Give Them a Great Start for Life. Daniel is an award-winning author, TEDx speaker, and productivity expert. Welcome to 2020, Daniel C.
Yeah, hi Tosh, it's great to be here. Great to have a conversation.
It's great to have you with us, mate, and we look forward to opening up the talkback lines soon on 1-800-316-316. So if you want to place a call to talk with Daniel or give your thoughts or share an idea, call us and let us know what your thoughts are. Our text number is 0447 488 316. Send us your thoughts a little bit later on as well as we get into conversation with Daniel. Daniel, tell us what's happening with people in our Australian society as the rise of technology continues to dominate.
Yeah, look, I don't think you need me to tell you what's happening. I think everyone feels it and knows it. There is a hustle and a busyness that is just taking over our lives, and we all feel it. You know, we're busier than we were pre-COVID. There's this sense where we're running from one thing to the next. Obviously finances are tight for many of us, but time is even tighter. And we're struggling with, our emails and our meetings and our calendars and school drop-offs and pickups. And it's very hard to live, I suppose, a peace-filled, spiritual, relational life in that rush. And so, yeah, I really care about helping people think deeply about how they live and how they schedule their time and how they make space.
And so making space in the midst of the hustle, how do we go about that in space making?
Oh, look, that's a big question. Well, so there's a few different ways I like to tackle it. I mean, I think essentially it starts with the paradigm of shifting the way you see time and the way you see your life. I actually really like Oliver Burkeman's book, 4,000 Weeks, where he talks about time being our life rather than something we manage. So we manage money, we have money, we spend it, we save it. But he says we don't really do that with time, because the reality is that, like, the hour, I spend chatting with you, or the half an hour or whatever it is half an hour of our lives that we never get back. I hope it's okay. But the way we use our time and how we shape our attention is actually the texture of our life, and therefore it has incredible meaning. So I think to make space, it begins by recognizing that actually life is precious. And even with an eternal view of time, what we do in this earth matters. And therefore, what might it look like to be thoughtful about slowing down and reflecting and living a life with a bit more intention? That's probably where I'd start, actually, rather than talking about technology itself.
That is a very interesting way to open up the conversation, shifting the way we see time. It makes me feel guilty, and I'm sure maybe one or two others out there that are listening today, for using the term time poor. I mean, that's a term that's been rising in popularity over the last little while, but it makes me think, oh my gosh, if I use that term, I'm thinking about my life being poor. But no, how do we go forward with valuing the way we see time?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it does begin by being considered. I read a book recently by John Mark Comer. It's a fantastic book, Practicing the Way, and he talks about how the ancient monks, I think the Benedictine monks, had a skull on their desk. They would have a Bible and they would have a skull, and it reminded them of the finality of life. So, not to be grim, but I think the way to start with time is simply to pause and think about, what do you really value in life? How would you like to live? Who do you love? Who do you want to spend your time with? Who would you like to be known for? I know they're big questions, and they don't have to be enormous questions, but simply pausing in big and small ways to think about how you'd like to use your time is the start. As I said, it doesn't have to be big. I encourage people I coach to simply pause between emails and ask the question, what's best next? What's the very next best thing I could do with this next moment at work? So it doesn't have to be big, eclectic questions. And of course, you might have bigger pauses like a digital Sabbath, or you might have bigger pauses like an annual retreat where you think about how do I want to shape my year or my month, my day. But I think it's about being intentional. If we don't have a plan, essentially, our attention will be hijacked and we'll just sleepwalk from one digital moment to the next or one meeting to the next. So I think it's just about pausing and reflecting and contemplating what matters and allowing a bit of space for that in our lives to start with.
It's a very interesting question that you have your people that you're coaching ask when they're going from email to email. Could we just dwell for a second on what does it mean to ask what's best next?
Yeah, and that's the thing about prioritization. It's pretty tough because you can pause and say what's best next, and there's an intuitive sense that we have of what that might be. I should actually have a conversation, or I should actually pause and have a coffee and think, or I might need to actually stop reacting and do that hard task I've been avoiding. So there's an intuitive sense of what we come up with when we ask what's best next. But then I also think it's helpful, and I talk about this in my training, my prioritization training, how do you actually know what your goals are in the next 6 months? How do you break them down to weekly goals? So what are the 4 or 5 tasks that matter most to you this week? And then when you ask the question day by day, what's best next? Well, then you're informed by a bigger context. It's very hard to say no to some things that are kind of jumping at you and yelling for your attention if you don't have the context of a bigger yes. So the clearer you are about what your yeses are, the more likely you are to make space and separate yourself from the digital clutter in the moment. Does that make sense?
Context matters. Yeah, context matters. But how do you coach your clients, and what kind of advice would you give to our Vision family here across Australia and abroad as well about deciding on what your yeses are?
That's a big question. So look, I'm a productivity coach. I'm a time management and productivity expert. That's essentially my job. I probably should have mentioned that. But so if I was taking someone through, let's say, my masterclass, we start by looking at broader frameworks. So I like the 5 capitals framework, where we look at what is our current investment in our relational capital, so our relationships and those we love. Intellectual capital, so our mind and our knowledge. Financial capital is our wealth and our monetary income. Spiritual capital is our inner life and faith, if you come from a faith background. And physical capital is your time and energy, your physical health. So we kind of map that out, and we have a current state, and then we have a future state, and it's like, well, where would you like to be? And knowing that you can't increase all those things at the same time. Usually when you increase one area, something has to drop. You can't get rich, beautiful, and have an amazing inner life all at the same time. Like in reality, if you want an amazing inner life, you probably have to earn less. So it's a balance. So we start to actually look at the life you like, and then we go into very practical tools like how do you plan. How would you set that out as 6-month goals? How might you plan your week? And then how might you execute it day by day? Does that make sense? So there's different ways to approach it.
And so, Daniel, we're going to break in about a minute. But just thinking about those 5 capitals and the question of what your current state is to what your future state is, could you just give our listeners a thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, I do like how Mike Breen suggests that all capitals aren't of equal value. Now, he would suggest that actually, if you look at the life of Jesus, he would put spiritual capital at the highest and financial at the bottom, whereas we put financial and intellectual capital at the top as the most valuable things in our society, and spiritual capital at the bottom, and then relational capital at the bottom. So we kind of get our order the wrong way around. Even if you look at the happiness research, those who are happiest tend to be spiritual and relational. They have great relationships and they have a deep inner life. and money doesn't necessarily equate to great health. So that probably didn't answer your question easily, but I'd say when we reflect on the capitals of our life and what we want to invest in, it's also worth thinking about what actually makes a human happy and what helps us to live well. And it's often the things that are opposite to what our culture tells us.
Daniel, can you share with us about the 5 capitals of life that you were going on repeating to us earlier, being relationships, intellect, finance, spiritual, and physical, and how those things reflect into the book that you've written about making space?
It's worth being intentional and thoughtful about how we engage in our time, how we use our time, what we do day by day, and how we organize ourselves. But in my book, I talk about 2 different habits, or 2 different series of habits that we need to have right in order to live a full and healthy life. In terms of productivity in the digital age, we need the habits of keeping pace, and we need the habits of making space. So I like to map it out as if it was an upside-down curve. Imagine a curve where you're looking at technology and productivity, which is a bit ironic given the conversation and the tech issues we've had today. But technology and productivity, imagine it as an upside-down curve. You absolutely need technology to be productive. In today's busy age, we need to be fantastic at all the different tools and screens, and increasingly with AI, we'll need to use AI in order to keep up. And that's called keeping pace. So it's about setting goals. It's about getting your inbox to zero. It's about knowing how to manage your time, your calendar, your to-do list, and to organize your life around others. But at the same time, what happens if you continue using technology, you don't just get more and more productive, you actually end up reaching this productive middle where more technology isn't more productive. But then if you imagine a curve that's upside down, if you continue reaching for your phone first thing in the morning and last thing at night, if you continue doing more and more online, and if you find yourself busier and frantic with less margin and no space, you end up sliding down the right-hand side of the curve, and you find yourself less productive, less happy, and less whole. And to actually make space, you need a different set of habits. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And so with keeping pace around, you said something there around organising your life around others. How does one open up that conversation with oneself?
Well, so when it comes to building relationships, I think, again, we need keeping pace and making space. So keeping pace from a work perspective, consistently getting things. Making space, which is the other side of the curve, is often about disconnecting from technology and connecting with people in a real way. The 3 areas, if you want to really make space and actually come back from the right side of the curve to that healthy middle, is what I call deep relationships, deep focus, and deep thought. Essentially unplugging from technology long enough to reconnect with humans in communities, which is good for us and our souls. So that's deeper relationships. Deep thought, to disconnect for long enough to actually think our own thoughts and not be constantly reaching for a device every time we have silence. And deep focus, which comes from actually disconnecting. Get those things right. So if you unplug to make space and use technology to keep pace, well, then you find yourself in a healthier space from a kind of a productivity and health perspective.
And we do have a caller who's called in right now, and it's Richard from Swansea in Tasmania. We want to welcome you to the show to have a word with Daniel. Richard.
Yep. Good morning, Tosh, and good morning, Daniel. Thank you for taking my call. I only called in just as you were talking about how do we work out what we should be looking at on the internet or not. And it reminded me of the passage that we studied in our small group earlier from Titus 2, verse 11 and 12. For the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright and godly lives in this present age while we wait for the blessed hope, the glorious appearing Christ Jesus. And I think, I know I can spend a lot of time on the internet, But sometimes I know that, a little voice in the back of my head is saying, no, there's other things that you need to do. I'm just wondering if you would like to comment on that.
Daniel.
Look, it's great to hear from you, Richard. I'm a fellow Tasmanian. I'm in Hobart, so we're not that far. Well, Swansea's not quite a stone's throw, but, we're pretty close to each other. No, I like the scripture, and I think that's a good point. I really think it's a tension for us because digital technology and using the internet, using many of the tools that I think God has given us in this day and age can really help us. They can help us to connect with people. They can help us to learn. They can help us to expand our mind. There's so many ways that technology is useful and can be used in godly ways. But a lot of the time, as you mentioned, we end up finding that we become busy and frantic and distracted and actually unable to be at peace and listen to God's voice or to simply sit and contemplate his word. So it really is about learning to know when to use technology and when to unplug, which is why I talk about keeping pace, which is using tech well, and making space, which is learning to intentionally unplug as a habit. So I see what you've said, and I actually agree. I think it's about discerning when is a tool helping us to connect with faith and with God and with others and with our calling, and when is it pulling us away and I suppose being an idol if you use biblical terminology. But for many of us, I think we spend too much time online and not enough time disconnected. Do you have any thoughts about that, Richard?
No, I fully agree. I think there's so much in our life that can be, as you call, neutral, and we can either use it to God's glory or become consumed with it, and it becomes an idol. So it's just that discernment of working out when is enough, when is it being a tool, or when is it being something that's controlling us.
Yeah, definitely. Look, the only tweak I'd have on that language is I do actually potentially question the idea that technology is just a tool. And I know you didn't quite mean it like that. A lot of people say it's a neutral tool and we can use it however we want, just like money is a neutral tool. However, if you look at the scripture, Jesus talks about money as mammon, and it's not necessarily neutral. It can be used for good, but it tends to have a draw towards itself and away from God. And I would say the same is with technology. I do like some of the writing by Tim Challies, and he talks about how technology enables idols. And so we just have to be very careful as we engage in some technologies because the design is not towards God, it's actually away from God. And while we can use technology to support godly aims, it's not necessarily designed with that in mind. Does that make sense? So I think it is a tool. We can use it positively or negatively, but it's not necessarily neutral. We have to be more thoughtful about it than that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that correction. I stand corrected. But yeah.
Oh, no, not a correction. No, I didn't mean it in that way at all, but I just thought it'd be good to add something to that anyway. Yeah. It's I like your point and I agree with you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Keep up the good work. God bless you both.
God bless you too, Richard. Bye. God bless, mate, and thanks for calling us, Richard. And if you want to call, the number is 1-800-316-316. But as we continue on, Daniel, would you share with us around the idea of making space, unplugging, and what is digital overuse?
Yeah, so what I would say is if I went back to that curve, and if listeners have just joined in, I talked about the idea of mapping productivity against technology, and it's an upside-down curve where you need to use technology to survive and live well in this age, which I call keeping pace, and you need to intentionally unplug from technology if you want to not slide down the right side of the curve into digital overuse. So digital overuse is what happens when we overuse technology. And it's not something we necessarily talk about often, but we feel it. And the symptoms of digital overuse are that we are busier than ever before. There's no margin in our life. We often have little silence and solitude. And we find that our attention and concentration is fractured, which means that we find it harder to read a book. We find it harder to do long-form work or long-form thought. When we have a moment, we want to go from one thing to the next because we're shaping our mind in fractured tiny chunks, a bit like watching YouTube shorts or Instagram reels. And so digital overuse changes us from the inside out and the outside in, and it leaves us with less space, with less peace and more anxiety. And so once we experience those symptoms, which really are the symptoms we see across Western society, we need to start thinking about what might it look like to intentionally unplug from technology and to invest in relationships, deep thought, and self-care without screens or in a less screen-oriented way, not to reject the wonders of technology, but to return to that healthy middle where technology becomes a gift rather than a curse. Does that make sense, Tosh?
It makes a lot of sense. You said that the digital overuse changes us from the inside out and from the outside in. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, look, I mean, and I refer to the work of Neil Postman, a fantastic media theorist from, I think, the 80s and 70s, who talked and predicted, actually, that technology would change us organically. So it's organic, not additive. It changes us from the inside out. Look, the easiest way to describe it without using theory is when I was young, I played the piano. And I played the piano. My parents paid for a lot of piano lessons, probably more accurate. And and they wanted me to practice, let's say, 15 minutes a day. And I fought tooth and nail, just like my kids are right now.
Imagine that.
I know, poor me. But after years of practicing the piano, I could play Chopin and Mozart and classical pieces, because that's what I learned, without sheet music. And my fingers would simply move up and down the scales, and I felt the music, and I felt a sense of timing and also joy with the art of playing piano. And so that's an example of neuroplasticity, or organic changes, okay, where the brain changes based on what we habitually do. So whenever we regularly do something, neurons fire, pathways develop, we change from the inside out because our brain changes based on our habitual actions. Now, we know this with sport, we know this with creativity, we know this with whatever spiritual discipline we do. What we do regularly changes us, okay? The challenge is, and I talk about this in my TED Talk, that the average Australian adult now spends 9.4 hours a day practicing the internet. Office workers spend 12 hours a day practicing the internet. So the question I ask is, what would happen if I practiced the piano for 60 hours a week or 9.4 hours a day? How dramatically would that change my perception of the world, myself, and my skills? Well, I suppose the question we need to ask is, what happens when we practice the internet 9.4 hours a day? Does it change our mind, our faith, our relationships, and our sense of time? And the answer, I think, is absolutely yes. And so without an awareness that technology and overuse changes us organically, we won't be able to tackle the broader issues in society of busyness and overwork. Does that make sense? Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense. And so that habitual action that we have of click, 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 or just as the internet would feed new pieces of data to us, you're saying that's really changing us. It's changing the way
absolutely. I was having a conversation with a young person the other day, and I said, look, what movies do you enjoy? I was just trying to make conversation, and he said, I don't watch movies. And I said, how come? Don't you really like them? And he said, it's not that. But he says, I just don't have the concentration to watch a full movie anymore.
Wow.
And I said, that's interesting. I said, why is that? And he literally said, well, basically ever since I've got Instagram and I've been scrolling reels, I just don't have that ability to sit for 2 hours. And that is just one person's story, but it's mirrored across our entire society. I ask leaders when I do keynotes across Australia, who here can't watch a movie without reaching for their phone? And 20% of the room, these are adult professionals who have kind of grown up in a working world. 20% of people put their hand up and say, we can't watch a movie anymore because we don't have the concentration span. So there is no doubt that the more you practice short form, novel, randomized and notification-based workflows, meaning that you just chop from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, based on novel, interesting stimuli, which is what the internet is shaped for, particularly social media, it will change you organically from the inside out, and you will no longer be able to read Dostoevsky. You won't be able to sit for 2 hours in silence, and you'll find it hard to pray. So we really need to take this on as disciples of Jesus and consider when technology is of value and adding to our lives, but when is the very action of short-form novel scrolling training our brains away from a focused, concentrated life? I think it's a really serious and important issue for discipleship.
It puts another angle on the scripture, be still and know that I am God, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And going into...
And silence is important.
Yeah, and going into that, like what are the practices? Okay, people are sitting around, they scroll, they're on the internet for 9 point something hours a day, as you say. But we have to then, if we don't want to continue like that, we have to retrain ourselves. What kind of practices could we put into place to unplug? What kind of other strengths
and look,
could
firstly,
we
I
build?
just want to say I'm not anti-technology in any way. I'm on screens 9.4 hours a day because I run a YouTube channel and podcasts and online training and like I work on the internet. So I'm not anti-technology, but I am very thoughtful about the types of technology I use, not just the content, but the nature of it, and that's what we miss out on. So in terms of very practical stuff, I talk about annual, weekly, and daily practices in my book, Spacemaker, and I go very, very heavy in terms of these are the practices that you need to consider to actually disconnect and enjoy technology without being overcooked. But if I look, the daily habits, the simplest, most essential, important thing you can do as a ground zero, like you can do it right now before this interview finishes, type of habit is to get rid of notifications on email, Teams messages, Slack, and any social media. I get rid of it on WhatsApp. I get rid of it on any gaming devices. I basically kill all notifications except for text messages and phone calls. Notifications are basically designed to train your brain to require short-form interrupted dopamine pathway distractions. So the design of notifications are not to help you as a human. They are to help you love the apps that you're using on a regular basis. So go into your notification settings and get rid of every notification basically and go silent. The world doesn't end, okay? There won't be earthquakes. There won't be war. Like the inbox will continue. Like the world will continue if you don't have notifications. Don't worry about that.
Are you sure? Are you sure now?
Yep. You'll still breathe, and your heart will probably still work. Maybe not. Maybe with a bit more adrenaline. But no, seriously, just turn off the notifications and recognize it'll be uncomfortable. I'm making fun of it, and I don't mean to in a silly way. I mean that because we're so used to dopamine addicted pathways, it'll feel weird when you have silence. And as much as you long for space and as much as you long to slow down, it's hard to do because that actually requires that then you sit with your emotions and your unprocessed thoughts and you allow yourself to listen to God's voice again. And actually it's easier to click on Candy Crush. So I'd say it's going to be uncomfortable, but uncomfortable and emotional doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's the first step towards a bit more of a spacious life. So that's a very simple step. There's obviously a lot of other things I'd recommend, but if you're feeling overwhelmed, just start with that. Just go to your notification setting and turn off everything.
That's brilliant, Daniel. We'll come back to some of those other thoughts about unplugging digitally in a moment. We do have another caller that's come through. This is Kay from Gilgandra in New South Wales. Welcome to 2020, Kay.
Hello. Thank you for the lovely program.
Oh, thanks for listening.
And I love Vision Radio, and I agree with everything, and we do need technology. But one of my favourite verses, I've been a Christian since I was 4 and baptised in water and the Holy Spirit at 10, and I travel an hour and a quarter to work and pray in tongues while I'm listening to Vision.
Hey.
And I've hit 2 kangaroos over the last year. And at those times I had Greg Laurie on.
Okay.
And everything was okay. Thank you, God.
Absolutely.
One of my favourite verses is, in all your ways acknowledge him and he'll direct your path. And I believe as we get busier and busier, just literally say, well, Jesus, what will I do? Where will I go first? And allow him to gently give us a thought, a little nudge to do what we need to do, and then thank him. And I can see his hand. And I loved about the piano because I had 6 months lessons when I was 12. A lady at church gave them to us for free. But I've loved the piano, and I've played by ear, and I've played the piano in nursing homes for 30 years now, running sing-alongs. And I know it's a gift. So maybe those people need to practice the piano a few more hours.
Absolutely, Kate.
I meet people that learnt for 10 years, and, they're only 60 or something, and they say, oh, no, I haven't touched the piano for 5 years. And I say, well, just play 10 minutes a month. Just
Yeah.
stir that gift up because it's all in there. And I can even play songs with my eyes shut now. So I understand about what you said about however that works.
And what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that, Daniel?
Oh, look, I think we should all play the piano. Not that I do anymore, but no, look, music's beautiful. Investing in quality leisure activities that can serve and add life, I think they're beautiful. And I think it was Kay potentially.
Kay.
Sorry, I forgot your name. Kay. Sorry. I think it's an example that the more you practice, the more you enjoy it, and you can serve God through it. So thank you for your sharing.
And in every sing-along I ever run, I have maybe the Lord's Prayer or Amazing Grace or What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and people are receiving it. They're receiving, take it to the Lord in prayer.
Absolutely. It's the word of the Lord that has power, isn't it? It's prayer that has the
Amen.
power. And Daniel, and thank you for joining us today, Kay. We really appreciate your call. God bless.
God bless you and keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you, Kay.
God
See
bless
you. Bye. And so, Daniel, Kay makes a great point about the practices that we keep becoming natural and becoming profound and becoming a part of who we are. The practice of the internet, I've never heard it phrased like that, being 9.5 hours a day by many adults. How do we reframe or reapproach the internet so that we can use it in a more God-honouring way if we found within ourselves that we're using it in a way that is distracting? We're hitting Candy Crush instead of opening up our Bible. What are some of the practices of unplugging that we can add to turning off notifications?
Yeah, great. So look, I mean, I think, again, you always need the habits of keeping pace. So knowing how to use technology well. I teach people how to get their inbox to zero and how to use online to-do lists. So when we use technology, we should use it well. But in terms of the other side, the habits of making space, they're the habits where you intentionally unplug and disconnect from technology to experience a better life. So I talk about annual, weekly, and daily patterns. So yes, turning off notifications is a daily habit. It's just something you do every day. On the weekly habit side, another daily habit that I really recommend is starting and ending the day without your phone. So, not waking up and listening to bad news or opening up your email, but actually charging your phone outside of your bedroom as a family, and actually waking up, maybe to an old-fashioned alarm clock or some digital technology that doesn't open you to the, internet browser. Or maybe just an old iPhone that isn't connected with a SIM card. But the point is to start the day by simply waking and praying and thinking and reflecting rather than diving into bad news, so you hear your thoughts rather than other people's thoughts, and maybe even God's thoughts. Does that make sense? And to finish the day the same way, maybe connect with your spouse, maybe reflect, or maybe just go to bed quietly rather than kind of being on a phone in your bed. So those kind of tiny habits of unplugging day to day can make a big difference. Weekly habits is the digital Sabbath, and I could talk about that if you want, but a day without technology. And I've written a lot about that in Spacemaker and other forums. And then annually there are practices that I talk about, like disconnecting from technology when you're on holidays and having a different relationship with the online world when you have your bigger breaths. But those kind of patterns, annual, weekly, daily, if you intentionally build them into your life, can actually make a tremendous difference.
We've got about 3 minutes left, Daniel. Would you share some thoughts with our audience here today, our Vision family, about the digital Sabbath?
3 minutes, yes. Essentially, Sabbath is a very wide, broad concept that goes all the way through Scripture, from the moment that we read Genesis, where God made the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, and then commanded that we did the same, all the way through to the 10 Commandments, where Sabbath is commanded, all the way through the way Jesus talks about Sabbath, which redefines him as the center, but it doesn't remove the need for a day of rest. I just came to the conclusion that if I was working, let's say 5 or 6 days a week, and my job requires that I'm online, communicating, swiping, typing, and using the internet, well, then if I was to have a day without work, I would need to not do what I do for work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Just like if I was a farmer, well, then it would make sense not to farm on my day off, and maybe I should sit down and use the internet. But But because I'm online and on a screen constantly, well, the only way I could truly rest my mind as a knowledge worker, when my work is what I do in my mind, was to unplug from all my screens, my phone, my internet, my tablets for 24 hours, and to actually invest in a wider range of activities which involve worship and relationships. In my book, you can read more about it. I also have a free course on how to plan a digital Sabbath with a chapter from my book for free and a whole lot of videos at spacemakers.au/rest. So if you really want to dive in and plan an intentional day of rest and understand the theology and the theory behind how to do that, feel free, spacemakers.au/rest.
That's amazing. Daniel C., thank you so much for joining us here today on 2020. And their website again is spacemakers.au for information about how to find the book Spacemaker, and the course spacemakers.au/rest. We want to thank you so much for being with us today, enduring through our technical difficulties and giving some great feedback as well to the people who called in from around Australia. Thank you so much, author and speaker Daniel C.
Thank you so much, Tosh.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.